It's a mystery to me. We have agreed with which we have agreed, and you think you have to want more than you need. Until you have it all, you won't be free.
We are going to discuss the link between the ecological crisis and the social crisis. And the first point to consider is that we are living through an historical period. It is the first time in the history of the human species since 2 million years ago. It is the first time that our generations are living, experience the limits of the earth, of the biosphere. That is the fact that until now humans have lived as the biosphere, as the earth was infinite. Now that time is over. We call you the main aspects of that ecological crisis. Of course there is the climate change issue. I suppose that people here, of course, you know exactly what climate change is, even after 8 years with President Bush. So, a large part of the scientific community is afraid that climate change could reach a threshold, a point where there is no turning back. If we pass this point, they say, the climate could be in chaos. The second aspect is the biodiversity crisis. It is less studied, it is less talked of by the media, but it is also a problem with as many far-reaching consequences. Species are disappearing at an alarming rate. The biologists tell us that we are living through the 6th extinction of species. And you remember what was the 5th extinction? That of the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago. The third aspect of the ecological crisis is a general contamination of the environment. I will highlight only 2 facts. The weakening of the biological health of the oceans. Oceans are our greatest ecosystem, were always seen as infinite, as able to absorb everything. That is no longer the case. And another aspect of this contamination of the biosphere is general chemical contamination of the environment. The contamination accumulates at the top of the food chain. The top of the food chain is humans. Why, where there are so many facts sounding the alarm, why aren't we taking sufficient action to prevent the crisis? In brief, this ecological crisis is continuing because we are in a world society dominated by an oligarchy, a small group of very powerful people who control the main aspects of our society. And this oligarchy doesn't want to change, because change would mean weakening its power and privileges. To really understand that, we have to look at the social situation of our time. First, there is the return of the poverty in rich countries during several decades has stopped, and in many cases poverty is beginning to increase again. For example, in the United States, the proportion of poor is 23% of the population. One striking fact is that more and more poverty is not linked to unemployment. Working people are often poor because their salary is too low. Besides this increase of poverty everywhere, there is an increase of inequality. Inequality between the nations. But there is also an increase of inequality within nations. A group of very rich people was created. I call them oligarchy. So they have the money, they have the power. What does this oligarchy do? First, it saves its money in tax havens, and they put there a huge quantity of money, which could be considered stolen to the people. The oligarchy has also pushed for the decrease on taxation on the rich. You can see it in all the Western countries, with Reagan Clinton and Bush policies, of course, but also in Europe with Mr. Sarkozy in France or Berlusconi in Italy. The oligarchy also lives more and more secluded. The possibility of social advancement for the middle and lower class is blurred. And the oligarchy also tends to live more and more in separate areas, such as gated communities, places where they are among their own kind, with no power in close proximity. And that is very important. The oligarchy spends a lot. So, why is the oligarchy in a situation of such inequality exacerbating the ecological crisis? First, that the tendency to rivalry is common to human nature. Every man and woman in society at any time tries to distinguish himself or herself from others. Secondly, Veblen said that this characteristic is the engine of economic life. Wealth is not sought to fulfill real needs, but to acquire this distinction. Then comes the other point. In a society there are several classes, several social groups. Each class lives according to the principle of distinction. And the people in each group does so by imitating the people that are in the class above. All classes imitate the upper class, and the upper class sets the norm, the standard, the savoir-vivre, c'est Veblen, that is the good way of living. The upper class delineates the cultural model of consumption in a society. And why is the oligarchy today the ecological problem? Firstly, of course, because it is highly conservative and blocks the change necessary to adapt to the ecological and social crisis. It blocks, of course, by its political power, by its economic power, and partly by its control of the media, who made so difficult that the idea of a revolution would be possible. But the oligarchy is also the problem, and it may be as much important because it draws a cultural model of wasteful and overconsumption that is followed by all society. The main tool we have to prevent the deepening of the ecological crisis is to decrease the pressure on the biosphere. That means to decrease the mining of our natural resources and also to decrease our production of waste. In fact, we have to decrease the material consumption of the rich, that is roughly the 500 million people who belong to the middle class in the Western world. That is probably many of us here, me included. If we want to decrease the material consumption of the whole of society, of the middle class, we have to change radically the situation of the upper class, the super rich, the oligarchy. That is to reduce the great inequality that is the situation now. We have to distribute the income, but also to make sure that the income will be, the collective production will be in harmony with the possibility of the biosphere. I will conclude on this positive note to tell you that we can prevent ecological and social crisis not only by practicing constraint, but by a will to make policies which will make life better for everyone. I thank you for your attention.
I hope you're not lonely without me. Society, have mercy on me. I hope you're not angry if I disagree. Society, crazy indeed. I hope you're not lonely